I'm not sure when I first saw him. I was about 8 or perhaps 9. He was wearing a dark suit and a Homburg. His face was long and thin, and he had a squared-off mustache. His piercing eyes stared straight at me. He was solemn and kind of scary. I do remember our next encounter. It was at my bar mitzvah when I was given his talit, the one I'm wearing. It had been given to my father years before. LaJosh Kohn was born in Kovarce in 1887. LaJosh Kohn was my grandfather. He and most of his family perished in the Holocaust. I never knew any of them. His eyes stared at me from the picture on the mantelpiece. It was the only one we had of him. And I would stare back, searching his face, wondering what kind of a man was he? My parents spoke little about their families. It was just too painful. As a young man, LaJosh moved to nearby Topolčany, a lively town in eastern Slovakia that took its name from its towering poplar trees that shaded the only road into town. Topolčany had a rich tradition of Jewish life centered around its grand synagogue. Many of its town's 5,000 Jews were well off and supported a network of organizations. Its Talmud Torah was regarded as a mini yeshiva, good preparation for the real thing in Bratislava. Its Chevra Kadisha maintained 2 cemeteries. The community also had a mikveh, several kosher butcher shops, a home for the aged, a soup kitchen financed by a Shimon Reef, a wealthy wood merchant. They even had their own matzah factory. The town's Agudah Yisrael youth group published a popular weekly newspaper, and each year performed at the Tatra Cinema, a Purimspiel, which attracted many, many non-Jews. In Topolčany, LaJosh met by arrangement Bella Deutsch, a local girl. They married and had 5 children in quick succession. Nandor, Isidore, Mansi, Shari, and Heinrich, my father.
Grandfather traded animal skins. He'd trudge to nearby villages to buy hides. But he was a poor businessman and earned little. He'd complain, "Is mir wehgegangen? I got screwed." So on Thursdays, Bella would go to the shochet to pluck feathers from geese that had been slaughtered for Shabbat. She would then sell them in the marketplace for pillows and eiderdowns.
LaJosh was strict, and he had a temper. Once when he heard that my father had been in a brawl, he tied him to a chair and beat him with his belt. I savored these morsels, but they just weren't enough. I wanted real, live, flesh and blood grandparents who would bounce me on their knee, read me stories, and do all that corny stuff. So I would make things up. I imagined going to their house whenever things got too hot at home. "Leave it to me, Yuri. I'll straighten things out with your father," LaJosh would say, and Bella would lovingly stroke my head and give me a piece of her fresh baked strudel. I could even taste it, and it made me feel better. Growing up, I longed for the hearth that would make me warm whenever the world turned cold. In 1939, the skies darkened over Central Europe. Herr Hitler outfoxed Mr. Chamberlain and Czechoslovakia fell. Slovakia became a puppet state under the rabidly anti-Semitic Hlenka party led by Tiso, a Catholic priest. Over the next few months, cogs were set in motion in what was to become a devastating pattern throughout Europe. First, Jews were isolated. then stopped from working. Next, their property confiscated. Sensing danger, some young Jews left Topolchany, including my parents, who had been dating. Earlier, Muncie wanted to make Aliyah with her Agudah group. She was the youngest, and my father was against it. Some of her friends today are alive in Israel. My father cannot forgive himself. Then came the deportations. In the spring of '42, LaJosh was ordered to report with his family, which now included Malvin, my maternal grandmother, to the once happy Sokol cinema. They were told they were being resettled for their own safety and could take 25 kilos of personal effects. Cruelly, they packed their best clothes. Muncie, because of her youth, was intended for a labor camp and possibly life. But now, she refused to leave her mother, who was ailing. She too boarded the train to Auschwitz and death. They did not last long. The three women were gassed immediately. Grandfather, who was strong, was made to work, but he was a heavy smoker and traded his meager food rations for cigarettes. Why? He became weak and couldn't work. They hauled him off to Dr. Mengele's hospital. They injected water into his veins. Till today, no one smokes in our family. Now, Enid and I watch as our son Noah plays with his grandparents, even though they live in Australia. We see each other almost every year. It's important that he have what I didn't. But how about me? I'm grown up now, but I still want my grandparents. I'm told it's never too late to have a happy childhood. But at 50, how? While Czechoslovak Jews were being herded into the death camps, the Nazis were confiscating all their Judaica. Between 1942 and 1945, they plundered 140,000 objects. They stole so many religious books and manuscripts and paintings, Torahs and ceremonial objects that they filled 54 warehouses. The country was to be completely Judenrein. Its people and its religion. Recently, I learned that over 1,000 Torahs had survived the war. They were now in London at the Czech Memorial Scroll Center. As I thought about these scrolls, I realized they are our people, uprooted from their homes, thrown into trucks, warehoused in ghettos, where each was numbered and catalogued so they could be displayed like some shameful relic. Then, forgotten.